because you need to understand this is what I've been telling you, what I've been suggesting, what I mean when I talk about Liberty Villages. This is what I'm talking about. Let me get Google Chrome up here and get into the chat room in Blog Talk. But meanwhile, let's listen to this. I've told you that the basis of every civilization is the self-sufficient family farm. Told you that. Well, now let's hear from somebody in a self-sufficient family farm. They call it Permaculture 101. Permaculture 101. Commonweal, W-E-A-L, garden is where this was shot.
There's many one-liners in terms of what's permaculture, and I think my favorite one is really, it's a design science. It's rooted in observation of natural systems, and to learn how to design how we live that has the stability and the resiliency of a natural ecosystem. The three ethics are care of the earth, care of people, and basically setting limits to population and consumption and reinvesting surplus back into the system. We focus on agriculture a lot because that's a place that we can interface, and it's such an incredible reflection of interconnectivity. It's the best vehicle for going back to connecting back with nature and back with the earth is through our food, through our medicine, but it's also through our building materials, through our relationship with animals, through our relationship with each other, through our local community. I mean, it's a huge conversation that you can just, have agriculture at the core of that and talk about economy and finance and trade and, ecology and community and how do we get our needs met? What are our needs? And, how can we get them met in a way that isn't going to be poisoning everything and destroying everything? And the good news is the solutions are here. They're available on every scale. And what we're holding, I think, are practical on-the-ground solutions that we can do on any scale, whether it's an individual scale, like I get up in the morning and I decide, what am I going to consume or not consume today? Where am I going to buy my food if I don't grow my own? Or how do I start growing my own food? Or if I'm going to go buy something, what's the impact of that product on the...
Now remember what I have told you. If you provide your own energy from the sun, the wind, everything God gave you, and you grow your own food, you can do it in the backyard, thank you. Grow food, not grass. Spend as much time growing food as you do mowing your yard and trying to blend in with the neighbors. You could feed yourself and your family.
Environment. So we're trying to open up people's eyesight and expand people's awareness, give them a few tools that then they can go on their own journey into the world, and they'll find their own learning path of what they have. They have a toolbox, a little toolkit that they can take with them to go and build their own little permaculture systems or build their own life journey that will help be of service to the greater community and to the future generation.
A community, a Liberty Village.
That's what we're doing.
Now, let me again stress the need for this. The need for this. Obama nationalizes, so the story says here, Obama nationalizes all food in order to send millions of Americans into FEMA camps. This story comes from Dave Hodges, and Obama has issued Executive Order 13603. Write it down. 13603. At a time of the president's choosing, the federal government may take over all forms of energy, all forms of civil transportation, all usable water from all sources, all commodities and products that are capable of being ingested by either humans or animals. All commodities and products that are capable of being ingested by either humans, human beings, or animals, health resources, drugs, biological products, medical devices, materials, facilities, health supplies, and services. Jade Helm is about putting, according to Dave Hodges, is about putting the nation under the control of the globalists. We're living at a time of unprecedented craziness and life-threatening danger. Jade Helm's Special Operations Forces are practicing to extract political dissidents under the unconstitutional authority of the NDAA. Further, Jade Helm conventional military units are practicing to put several communities under martial law. In addition, America is witnessing unprecedented troop and military equipment movement throughout the country. Despite the serious nature of these events, there is a more insidious and dangerous threat that looms over the American people. President Obama has nationalized all American food and food production. Keep in mind, folks, that I've told you that the basis of every civilization is the self-sufficient family farm, and that's been under attack with the first object of their control was hemp. Through Executive Order 13603, Obama has granted himself the authority to control all food and now has the unique ability to starve America into submission as it relates to his handing the country off to the bankers in the name of perpetuating the New World Order and ridding the planet of the weak and those who are not willing to go along with the international destruction of America. Again, for months I've been telling you that this one world government, this war on terror, is a war against anyone, anywhere, anyone, anywhere that doesn't want to go along with the one world government of the bankers, by the bankers, and for the bankers. Dave Hodges is telling you the same thing. And they want the Georgia Guidestones tells you they wrote it in stone and they want to get rid probably 90% of the people, the weak, the useless eaters, and those who are not willing to go along with the international destruction of America. Here are some of the key provisions of EO 13603 and its impact on the control of the American food supply. And here's your hidden danger in Jade Helm. Kind of out of sight, wouldn't you say? With a stroke of his pen, Obama has total and absolute control over all food, where his EO 13603 states food resources means all commodities, products, simple, mixed, or compound, or complements to such commodities or products which are capable of being ingested by either human beings or animals, irrespective of other uses to which such communities or products may be put at all stages of processing, from the raw commodity to the products thereof, in a vendible form for human or animal consumption. Food resources also means potable water packaged for commercially marketable containers, packaged in commercially marketable containers, all starches, sugars, vegetable and animal or marine fats and oils, seed, cotton, hemp, and flax fiber, but does not mean any such material after it loses its identity as an agricultural commodity or agricultural product. Food resource facilities means plants, machinery, vehicles, including own farm, and other facilities required for the production, processing, distribution, and storage, including cold storage of food resources, and for the domestic distribution of farm equipment and fertilizer. This unconstitutional executive order is particularly disturbing in that it clearly states that the government has control over anything that is capable of being ingested by either human beings or animals. If you thought you and Fido were going to get through the coming food crisis by storing and consuming dog food, think again. It's important to assess how devastating this executive order could prove to be to the American people through a brief assessment of America's food vulnerability. Here's a snapshot of that. Almost beyond belief, a full 79% of the people that use food banks and purchase typically buy cheap, unhealthy food still have enough to just have enough to feed their children. The price of food continues to quickly outpace the paychecks of most middle-class families. For example, the average price of ground beef just hit a new all-time high, record high of $3.88 a pound. There are over 50 million Americans that are dealing with food insecurity in a various degrees of distress. Okay. All right. Good morning, Peter. How are you?
Well, sorry I'm a little late, but I finally got a cup of coffee. That'll help.
Well, cheers. I got one too. And the time was well spent. You know, Peter, for many years here, I've been telling people that we've had the answers to all of these problems for 100 years at least. I asked myself once upon a time, well, how did they make it 50 years ago? How did they make it 100 years ago? How did they make it 1,000 years ago? And I came up with an idea, and I owe this to one of my authors whose books I sold at one time, Richard Kelly Hoskins. He said every civilization has been built on the self-sufficient family farm. And I proposed an answer, something called Liberty Villages. Low-cost structures, teepees, yurts, sod houses, hempcrete, you know, lot of variety out there, a lot of material out there. Hay bales, what the hell, hay bales. But, you know, instead of feeding it to your animals, build a house out of it. And I also suggested that if you if you grew your own food, even in the backyard. Everybody told me we can't come to Liberty Village, Clay. We've got jobs. Okay. Then bring the farm to you. You don't have to move to the farm. Bring the farm to you. That neighborhood you live in was once upon a time a farm. Now, if you grow food, not grass, and you transform your roof and rebuild that windmill that your grandmother had, you don't really need the government or the banksters for much, do you? And I just, while you were getting that cup of coffee, I read Obama's executive order. And in the story, they point out that the price of ground beef has just hit a brand new all-time record high of $3.88 a pound. That there are nearly 50 million Americans that are dealing with food insecurity and various degrees of distress. That just 1 out of 7 Americans rely on obtaining food from various banks at one point or another, and these food banks are beginning to experience shortage records. And this is the executive order 13606. 13603, just signed by Obama, that says he can take over all forms of energy, all forms of civil transportation, all usable water from all sources, all commodities and products that are capable of being ingested by either human beings or animals, and health resources, drugs, biological products, medical devices, materials, facilities, health supplies, and services. Sounds to me like, and I've been telling people for months, if not years, that this whole thing, this war on terror, is basically a war against anyone, anywhere that wants to, that doesn't want to cooperate with or be under the New World Order of the bankers, by the bankers, and for the bankers. Peter, you're one of the foremost authorities on at least one segment of that. That is the energy supply. And one of the things that we'll talk about here, hopefully, is the over-unity devices. Now, everybody wants to sell you one, or everybody wants to sell you the plans to one. I've never personally seen one. I've never seen one plugged into a light bulb and turned the light bulb on. And but boy, you send me $50 and I'll show you what Edison developed here. I'll send you what Tesla developed here. Just send me $50. Sounds like the Nigerian scams. The banks got a money for me over here. The Nigerian government has money for me over there. All I got to do is send them $250. They'll be glad to send me a few thousand. I'm sorry to kind of go off on that rant. I covered a lot of things. You can pick and choose.
Well, I've been sipping my coffee, so this is good.
I may have to get up at some time during this rant, hopefully after you take off with it and carry the ball to warm mine up. But go ahead, Peter.
Well, you go with your coffee, and I'll take over on a few things here. One, I think your idea of reading the executive order is good, because what it really shows is that the ultimate definition of a terrorist is just any individual who is willing to provide for his own needs and want to be left alone. I mean, that's the ultimate, even if he has no interest in harming anyone else, but he certainly falls into the category of being someone who is not easily controlled by the larger government plan, and so that's the real thing that we need to look very seriously at is just any individual who's willing to cover their own bases, whether it's for food or energy or lifestyle in any way, build a home that doesn't need a mortgage, those types of things. Those allow that person, those activities allow that person to have freedom from converting their time, working at a job to earn money to pay back all these things. In other words, so really, what all this stuff is a time-stealing process from our lives, and that's the antithesis of freedom. Freedom is the ability to use your time and your efforts for your own benefit rather than for someone else's. And so they're rapidly turning anybody who has access to the benefits of their own time and their own effort and their own intelligence, and that's the ultimate.
Peter, allow me to point out that there is a woman in Florida that had her home confiscated or sealed and ruled uninhabitable. She had to because she had her own energy system. She was not connected to the grid. And we've got other people that have been put in jail for collecting rainwater.
Yeah, that's true. These things are quietly being legislated all over the place. Many counties, especially in near large metropolitan areas, the planning code and all these types of things define a habitable residence as something that's connected to the grid power, and so you have to be careful about unfortunately this lady's house was taken away for whatever, because somebody interpreted that she was breaking the law, and I mean there are still areas out in rural areas where having power to the property is not defined as coming from the grid only, and so I mean the part of the the plan that's been slowly coming into play for decades involves basically turning ordinary law-abiding citizens into criminals simply because, one, they don't know what the law is, and two, that the law is starting to reach into every aspect of individual activity, and make ordinary activities into criminal offenses. So these are things that it's not too soon to make ourselves aware of, so that we don't get caught in these situations like this. It's happening. You're absolutely right. It's happening all over the place.
And well, that's why I suggested the village concept, because at least then you've got people of like mind around you to help protect you. But then again, that didn't work too well in Waco, did it? Which was exactly what we're talking about, a self-sufficient Christian community, not a compound, but a church, in my opinion.
Well, the thing is, the biggest problem with all of these things is actually finding people who are, have sufficiently, like-minded goals. And you've been promoting, certain ideas, of community benefit and things like this for a long time. And how many of them are, how big is the community you're living in? I mean, and I've looked at this same kind of thing, and each one of us has conceived of these things in ways that have made it. It's so obvious to us what we need to do, and yet other people don't automatically define what's right for them in the same way that we define it. And it's been very, the divide and conquer strategy has worked extremely well against all of us.
Oh, there you go, Peter. You triggered that song in the back of my mind. I keep hearing Don Henley singing, we've met the enemy, and he is us.
Well, this is the point, is that I think the government and the bankers definitely, think that we are the enemy. I think all of this goes back, regardless of how long things like this have been planned as an idea. Certainly, things changed radically during World War II. And Operation Overlord, I don't know if people are aware of this, but Operation Overlord was the plan of the Allies to make sure that Hitler did not figure out that they were going to land at Normandy. And it was an unbelievably complex web of lies and planted evidence and intercepted messages, and just layer upon layer upon layer of lies and misdirection and everything. So even after the invasion started at Normandy, the Germans were so completely fooled by all of this that they didn't even make any serious effort to counter the invasion for over 24 hours. And by then it was too late, and the rest is history. But the point is that it worked so well. The method of manipulation and creating a secret agenda and being able to pull it off, worked so well that they just never stopped. They, and they started using it on the general population after the war, and this has been going on now since the 1940s. So we're well into 85 years or something, 75 years later, and they have perfected this, to a staggering, level, and it's all based on the idea that if the lie is big enough, people cannot comprehend that it's a lie. And that's the underlying, supposition. If the lie is big enough, people cannot comprehend that it's a lie. They just assume that it must be true because everybody's, believing it or whatever else. I mean, global warming is a perfect example of this. I don't know any serious scientists who believe it, but it's moving forward as policy regardless. The media is pushing it, and so on and so on. So, the most of the world, the planet is not really warming up. The weather is changing, but the planet has never known a stable climate. So the idea that the climate is changing, has nothing to do with us. The climate has never stopped changing, really. And CO2 is a very minor player in the atmosphere as far as atmospheric heating. the largest greenhouse gas, quote, greenhouse gas, or heat-trapping gas in the atmosphere is water vapor. And you can prove this to yourself anytime, when a cloud goes by, you don't feel quite as hot under the sun, and when there's a cloudy night, it doesn't cool off as fast, and so on and so on. So, I mean, everybody knows that water vapor is responsible for over 85% of all heat-trapping effects in the atmosphere, not carbon dioxide. And typically, greenhouse operations pump the greenhouses full of carbon dioxide to make the plants grow faster. So under normal circumstances, if CO2 levels go up, it only promotes more plant growth. And so you have to ask yourself, well, if CO2 is rising, at an unprecedented rate, why isn't it being soaked up by the plant life on the planet? And that's because they're sawing down all the forests and everything else. So it's not just that we are liberating a lot of prehistoric carbon, by burning supposed fossil fuels. That's true. We are doing that. But the fact is that the plants, the trees, the forests, the things that would normally soak up that carbon dioxide, turn it back into cellulose and oxygen, are also being destroyed, and so they can't keep up. And again, that's the real problem. The attack on the natural world for profit, is the bigger problem.
Let me ask you. I'm sorry to diverge from this, but I was talking about the self-sufficient communities. I did a little clip from somebody that were trying to get one, but I told people that the attack, anytime a totalitarian regime takes over, they go after three classes of people in order, and the first is the self-sufficient family farm, because they don't want you being able to feed yourself. And that attack started way back in the 30s, I think, with the attack on hemp.
Earlier.
A rotational crop. Hemp was a rotational crop. George Washington said, sow it everywhere. You can make paper out of it. You can make clothing out of it. Our flag was made out of it. I think that was the start.
Written on it. I mean, it's just... hemp was the largest commodity in the world economy before oil.
Yes.
This is what most people don't understand. You couldn't run a ship on it. Canvas sails. Canvas and cannabis are the same root word.
Yep.
And and all the hemp rope, that it took. A sailing ship had a couple 100,000 pounds of hemp on it. You couldn't sail a ship across the ocean without hemp. And so, and all the varnishes and all of the, the oils and all of these other aspects of the plant, it makes cloth that's, softer than cotton and stronger than silk. And it is the premier, plant. It has something like 100 industrial uses or something. And so getting rid of that so that they could, bring in, nylon and, that kind of stuff, all the plastic fibers and that kind of stuff was necessary. So the idea that, hemp was outlawed because of, reefer madness or, that kind of nonsense, is a misdirection of the historic truth of it.
Little sleight of hand here. Look at it. Keep your eye on this hand.
The point is that the self-acting responsible individual is, it has always been the target, for totalitarian regimes. You can look at the farm collectivization, in the early Soviet Union under Stalin and things like this.
How about the 11 million? How about the 11 million people starved to death in the breadbasket of Russia, the Ukraine?
Right, exactly. And but the point is that we're up against a similar problem here, because the family farm wasn't taken away by the governments here. It was taken away by a series of manipulated boom bust cycles, which bankrupted most of the farmers here, so that their land could be bought up inexpensively by the big corporations and turned into supposed food factories rather than farms. And but what they're producing isn't really food anymore. It's what I just call it eating medium. It's just something that we eat, but it's not providing the kind of nutrition that real food provides. And I know a lot of people. I know a lot of people in who live in Australia and Europe and everything. And one of the things they hate the most about coming to the United States is that the food is so bad. They're just used to much more nutritious, much more flavorful, much more, just ubiquitously organic, non-GMO food. And they just don't like to come here, and it's pretty universal response from the people I know around the world.
I have a friend in Albuquerque that's a scientist, a nutritionist. She created a line of products for me, and one of the things that she used in the products, here I called it Heritage and Health products, was something called fulvic acid. Now, most people have never heard of fulvic acid, but she got her fulvic acid from prehistoric plants, prehistoric material. Why do you do that? Because I can't get it out of the plants we grow today. Because they have used too much Roundup on the farms. They've destroyed the integrity of the food that we get. And so it doesn't produce fulvic acid anymore, which heals and restores cellular damage. And we just had a scientist killed because he was curing autism, which he said was created by the vaccines. And now they're starting to study the effects of this glyphosate or something like that, and may not have pronounced that right, that is caused from the Roundup, the weed killer that they're spraying on your plants at these factory farms that you referred. So they're really killing us here. They're really poisoning us for profit. Well, they make a lot of money selling that Roundup, don't they?
Well, that's not the point. The point is that back in the 60s, the Club of Rome report, called Limits to Growth. They first published on this in the 60s, and basically they said that ultimately it isn't going to be wars and all these other things that are really going to wreck the world and change the real world order. It was going to be overpopulation, and so that was the first significant document which suggested that some sort of clandestine but systematic way of reducing world population should be implemented. And a lot of people are on board with that idea, and of course nobody in power can afford to take the blame I thought it was really quite funny. This poor underling just got 14 years for in jail for rigging the LIBOR rate, the interbank loaning rate. Some lightweight, third stringer, is blamed for the whole thing, as if this wasn't the policy from the very highest levels of the international banks. And but that's typical, of how this is done. And so yes, I agree that the general war against the rest of us is ratcheting up. And even if you don't have any radical tendencies, even if you don't have any radical tendencies, you're certainly not listening to this show. But the point is that the kinds of pressures that are being placed on everybody are designed specifically to do one of two things: either turn them into a radical, so that they will do something stupid and can be, marginalized, or their health is already so weak that they'll just, die prematurely and, fulfill their destiny in the plan, which is to leave the planet. So, either one of those two outcomes is well within, the plan that is being perpetrated against us all, and navigating this, in the next 20 years is really going to be increasingly difficult. There's no doubt about it.
Now, let's talk about over unity. I mean, to me, that is really the answer for everything, because if you can put a little power pack in your pocket or your trunk of your car or your back room, that will generate enough power to charge up your telephone, to allow you to make a cell phone call, to allow you to turn lights on your house so you don't have to sit around in the dark. You have defeated the forces that we're talking about that are arrayed against you. But who's got one? Now, I went to Albuquerque for a Tesla convention, and there was no magnetic generators to be seen. Nowhere.
Right.
I have seen a video of a steel ball inside of a squirrel cage and a permanent magnet put just outside the squirrel cage, and that wheel would turn forever. I was kind of reminded of putting a little small generator on my bicycle, and the wheel went up against my bicycle wheel.
Yeah.
And I had a headlight.
Right.
Didn't
but
have
it made it harder to pedal.
Yeah. Just that little wheel touching my front wheel gave me a headlight.
Right.
And
I remember I had one when I was a kid.
Go ahead. What?
Well, let me get into some of this, Clay, because you brought up a bunch of points first. First of all, let me just touch on this idea. One, you say you haven't seen any of these things. I have. Okay, and that's why you wanted me on the show. There are such devices, and I've been working with some of the more advanced people. If you'd come to the conference that we had in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho, last month, you could have seen some of the things, because John Bedini brought out a machine he built in the early 1980s that had never been shown in public before, and it was one of his early demonstrators, and it's It operates from 4 D-cell batteries, old flashlight, big old flashlight batteries, 1.5 volt things. But the thing is that those batteries were put into the machine, into the battery holder 25 years ago. And if you turn the machine over and you look at them, they're leaking, they're dead as a doornail. The tape that's holding them into the battery case is dried up and brown and brittle. And so you can see that these things have not been moved for a very, very, very long time. If you put a voltmeter on it before you start the machine, it reads 0 volts. And all you have to do is flick this, the little rotor on it, and it starts spinning, and lights start flashing, and the thing just starts rotating, and it starts spinning a little fan. And he sat there and ran it in front of everybody, and talked about the mechanism that he developed, the circuitry and everything else. And after about half an hour of running it, it was going about 50% faster because the batteries were starting to charge up. So, are there, self-running battery chargers out there? Absolutely there are, Clay. Are these things, available for anybody to buy? Absolutely not. And of course, that would make you, a definite terrorist. Because the war on terror is really about making sure that individuals are not able to take care of their own needs. And of course, the national security considerations of this, are that one, there are bad people out there, who we don't want, we don't want their ideology, impinging on our society. We don't want people, to be able to, kill us, simply because we think differently. And these are the arguments against ISIS and things like that. But the fact is that variations on this theme are in play against us right now. They don't want people like us who don't want to, buy energy from the utility, who don't want to burn fossil fuels, which is just a different way of thinking.
I'm not now let me clarify. Let me clarify here, Peter. I am not totally against fossil fuel because I like the sound of my Harley. Okay.
I agree. And again, see, this goes back to the idea that global warming, is going to create this, war on carbon. Carbon is not a pollutant on this planet. Never has been. And the real problem, getting back to the free energy stuff, the real problem is that they have convinced everybody through a misunderstanding of what the laws of thermodynamics say, that that in one breath they say energy cannot be created nor destroyed. Okay, so energy is a permanent fixture. Once you've got some energy, then it's always there. Okay, but then they say you can purchase it from this group over here. You can use it once, and then you must throw it away. And so what they have done is they said energy cannot be recycled. Okay, like aluminum. If I dig up a bunch of bauxite ore and smelt it down and make pure aluminum and make it into a beer can and have a beer, and then I can throw that aluminum can into the landfill and hope it eventually oxidizes and breaks down and becomes somebody's ore another million years from now. Or I can recycle that can to somebody who's going to melt it down again and make a new can out of it. The point is that the aluminum, once it's there, can much more easily be recycled and reused than mining it out of the ground again. And the same thing is true with energy. And this is one of the things they don't want you to know. And these are among the real secrets of free energy, is that energy cannot be created nor destroyed. Therefore, once you have purchased your energy, first of all, make sure that you're ending up using it for what you purchased it for. And don't try and, if you're storing the energy, like heat, for instance, don't store it in something that leaks. In other words, if I've got a gallon of water, and water is expensive and difficult to find, I'm going to want to make sure that I store that water in a container that isn't leaking, and so that when I come back, a week or 10 days later, that I still got my gallon of water. But the point is that heat is a type of energy which needs to be stored. And so when you are running your furnace in the winter, the only reason, after your home gets up to 70 degrees and it's 25 or 20 degrees outside, and you've got this over 50 degree temperature differential that your outside walls are supposed to be maintaining, once your house is up to 70 degrees, it should stay there. But the fact is, as everybody knows, their furnace comes back on in another 10 minutes. But the only thing it's replacing, the only thing your furnace is replacing, is the heat that leaked out in the meantime. You're storing your heat in a leaky bucket. And one of the simplest ways of lowering your energy dependence and lowering the amount of coal burned and all these other things, at the power plants, is to increase the amount of insulation in your home, in your outside walls, in your water heater, around your refrigerators, and all these other things where you're trying to maintain a temperature differential. If every one of those containers for heat had an insulation protocol similar to one of the old thermoses. We used to, when we were kids, you could put coffee in a thermos, and it was hot all day, and that's because that container was able to maintain heat at a rate which is generally referred to as an R factor of R 250. And so that coffee could actually be warm the next morning, 24 hours later, and no more heat was added to it. But if your home the outside walls were insulated to R100, your furnace could run 80% less time. You could use 80% less energy to keep your house warm. I know a guy who I helped him build an underground dome south of Coeur d'Alene, and the whole time he was building this thing, I was just saying, this thing, you guys, you're spending an awful lot of money, but you're not doing, what you need to do. And eventually he designed it a little bit and upped the insulation in at least in one of the dome sections. And he got it to the point, I think he got it up to maybe R80 finally. And that section was supposed to be heated with a little wood stove. And he can barely burn twigs in it because the heat builds up in there now so effectively and so quickly that if he actually threw in a log like a normal stove would, the inside temperature would go into the 80s and 90s because the insulation works so well. And this is the point. So free energy is about using the energy that you're purchasing and using it more efficiently. Don't throw it away. Don't let it leak away. Don't believe the people who say you can't use it twice. I can use energy 2 or 3 or 4 times. The heat in my coffee, in a thermos, will keep it hot for a very long time. And for instance, everybody says, well, we have a water shortage. We'll never be able to figure out how to efficiently and cost effectively desalinate water from the oceans and all this stuff. We can't let all the poor people have free water out of the ocean. It's just not feasible. And of course, this is a lie too. It costs almost nothing to desalinate water using a simple method called boiling and recondensing, just a steam distiller. And see, what they don't want you to know,
let me
because
stop you
most
for
people
just
don't
a
know how to
second.
read the science books anymore.
Pardon me for interrupting you.
Yeah, let me just go through this quick
All right, go
distillation
ahead.
thing,
Go
because
ahead.
it's an important
Go ahead.
illustration. And the thing is that the exact same amount of heat is liberated when you condense steam down into water. It gives off heat when it condenses like that. And the exact amount of heat that it gives back is the exact amount of heat it takes to boil it in the first place. In other words, the water moving from steam to water gives off heat, and the reaction of water turning into steam takes heat. Okay, and those two things are of equal quantities. Okay, so instead of boiling water, running it into steam, and then using more electricity to run a fan to condense it over here, and what all you have to do is set up a very simple situation where you insulate the heck out of this thing, and you all the heat that's coming out of the water after it's been distilled is transferred to the new incoming water that you're ready to boil using what's called a heat exchange, a set of intercooled radiators, and basically then all you have to do is add just a little bit more heat. Once the water's basically up to temperature, all you have to do is add a little bit more heat, maybe 5% of the total heat, to kick that off, boil it, bring it around, and then all of the heat that's in that steam will eventually be transferred back to the incoming cool water. And so the amount of energy, so you can recycle the heat that you're being used to create the steam, that heat can be recycled and recycled and recycled and recycled and reused and made more steam, and then recycled and to make more steam and recycled to make more steam. The idea that we can't reuse energy is a complete lie, and energy is available to do these things. Now, I've given a number of lectures on the ideas of genuinely recycling energy, and I have found patents that show that you can recycle mechanical energy under certain circumstances, you can recycle heat in certain circumstances, and you can recycle electricity in certain circumstances. And all of these things basically prove that the second law of thermodynamics is only true if you insist on using energy once and throwing it away. In other words, if we reduce our energy use to, the idea of a paper plate, that can be used once and then thrown away and can never be used again, then the second law of thermodynamics is true. But, in any other situation that makes sense, it's not a limiting case. And we can produce machines that produce more useful work by using energy and recycling it for reuse. And that's the trick. That's the trick to any real free energy system. That the work we can get out of the machine, or the benefit we can get out of the process, such as distilling water from the sea by recycling 90% of the heat and only using a little bit of extra energy to produce what we lost from the insulation, then that is the way to get higher levels of benefit from the energy that we have to purchase than what we get the benefit from. So these things are real. The methods of how to do it are straightforward. We've published a tremendous amount of information on these things. There's people been out there for decades screaming at people to look at these methodologies. I just bring one name to mind. Amory Lovins at the Rocky Mountain Institute started screaming about using more insulation, 30 years ago, and everybody thought he was a lunatic. But he was just way, way, way ahead of the mindset.
Well, let me ask you about one thing here that really bothers me. We've got electric cars. Tesla is building some really good vehicles with electricity, and there is a company somewhere that is making generators or are putting alternators on the wheels that you could just bolt onto an electric car, and then you've got a vehicle that should recharge all of its battery or even run off of the power off its wheels. Why is nobody doing that?
Well, because this is one of the things that's sort of forbidden. I've published on how to build this type of generator, what we call a low drag generator, or a type of generator that produces electric output without making it harder to turn. Remember the little bicycle headlight generator. When you engaged that, at night when we were kids, it made the bike a lot harder to pedal. And that's typical of an ordinary generator, is that the effect of taking electricity out of the generator makes it harder to turn, and that's why you need bigger and bigger engines to drive these generators, to produce more power. But there is a style of generator, and we've published on it a fair amount, that when it produces electric energy to charge batteries or whatever you want it to do, does not get harder to turn, and this is a maddening phenomena for people who want to believe that a generator is converting mechanical energy into electricity, which it is not. And it is possible. I think we aren't going to have the electric car until this sort of situation is resolved, because there isn't enough excess power on the electric grid right now to give everybody an electric car. There's no way. I mean, we're just about maxed out right now. So there's no real push to give people electric cars that have to be plugged in and charged at night, because there just isn't enough power for more than about 2 or maybe 3% of the population to have an electric car. So it's all just a token, presence in the market. And by the way, a Tesla car is a cool car. There's no doubt about that.
And they're supposed to have a big plant in New Mexico, Arizona, or Texas.
Yeah, Arizona. Yeah.
Arizona.
Yeah, Arizona. I think it is. Yeah, something like that. Yeah, they're putting in the largest lithium-ion battery factory in the world to make battery packs for the cars and also for home energy battery packs. So
talk to me about batteries. I mean, if the batteries are not that efficient, there's obviously room for improvement. What's the situation on that? Is there a difference? I just saw something about a water-based battery or something like that. What's the latest on that? And by the way, congratulations on your new website.
Oh, thank you.
Well, that's linked there right below your show, right below your name. This show is linked up on Blog Talk Radio and the freeamerican.com under your name, Peter Andrew Lindemann.
Thank you. So most batteries are water batteries, by the way. The lead acid battery is a water battery. it's based on a very small amount of sulfuric acid in a water electrolyte. And when the battery produces electricity, in other words, when you take electricity out of the battery, the electricity is actually coming from the chemical production of a water molecule. And because the hydrogen in the sulfuric acid is used to attack the oxygen on the positive plate, which is a lead oxide material. And so that hydrogen grabs that oxygen, produces a water molecule, and that's when the battery produces electricity. So most batteries, this is what they don't want you to know about a battery. It's really just a water fuel cell. And all the rest of the stuff is just catalytic. In other words, the other molecules are moving around, but when the battery is making electricity, it's also making water. And when the battery is charging, you are breaking water molecules down, and that's what absorbs the electricity. So, but the trick in a standard lead acid battery, for instance, when you charge the battery, you are taking those water molecules and you're breaking them down into hydrogen and oxygen. But if you do it wrong, in other words, if you do it too fast or if you do it under the wrong chemical circumstances, both of those gases just bubble off. I'm sure you've seen a battery that was, putting out a lot of bubbles when it's being charged. And under those circumstances, the electricity is going in, the water is being electrolyzed into hydrogen and oxygen, and the gases are escaping. And that actually is not, that battery is not charging under those circumstances, because to charge, it has to revert the chemistry back to what it was before it was discharged. And that means that after the water molecule is broken back down into hydrogen and oxygen, that electrical phenomena has to happen under a specific set of circumstances so that the oxygen doesn't bubble out as a gas, but it reacts with the lead on the positive plate to produce lead oxide again. And the hydrogen doesn't bubble out as a gas. It enters the electrolyte as an H2 ion to become part of the sulfuric acid again. And that's what strips the sulfate off of the plates again to restore the acid state of the electrolyte. So while you can't discharge a battery incorrectly, you can charge it incorrectly, and so the battery manufacturers have taken advantage of this, and they make sure that it's very easy to charge it incorrectly, and that's why they can basically say, well, this battery is guaranteed for 24 months or 36 months or 48 months. Because they know exactly how long it's going to take you to screw up the battery until it really doesn't work anymore. And that usually fails, 1 day before the warranty is, out, or 1 day after the warranty's out, or something like that. And so they really don't have to make good on any warranty. But John Bedini and I spent years and close to $1 million of stockholder money from his company, and figured a lot of this stuff out. We eventually found books that describe exactly how the lead acid battery works properly, and that book was published in 1922. In 1922, even before rural electrification, farmers and other people out in the middle of nowhere were starting to use electric things on the farm, primarily for farmers. The electric milking machines and things like this were starting to come online, and they needed to power these things. And the farmer didn't want to become a chemist, and he didn't want to understand electricity, and he wanted to be a farmer. So the manuals actually described, and educated them on how to maintain the batteries, and it told everything. It told the whole truth about how to maintain batteries and how to make them last indefinitely and all this kind of stuff. And so, having a solar home is about the most expensive electricity you'll ever pay for. It's probably $2 to $3 per kilowatt. And the main reason isn't just the cost of the solar panels, but it's in the cost of replacing the batteries every 3 or 4 or 5 years. And we've done an awful lot of work on trying to figure out how to help people not have to replace their batteries. In other words, develop a truly independent power supply that will last for, many, many years. If you've got a big battery pack for your solar panels, and you can do 5,000, charge and discharge cycles on those batteries instead of 300 or 400, then all of a sudden, if you're charging them and discharging them once a day, 5,000 cycles is 15 years of those batteries operating properly for your solar panels, and that's an awful lot of low-cost energy all of a sudden. So
have you been hindered? Have you been hindered in your research by the powers that be? I've had some of my people like Paul Pantone. They put in an insane asylum for 3 years.
Well, that's because he was actually demonstrating to people and trying to sell kits and everything else on how to run engines on water, or maple syrup or whatever else he was pouring down the thing. Coca-Cola.
Yes.
All sorts of things. And he was sort of vocal and a little bit obnoxious, in being, anti-establishment. I've never been hindered at all, and we've published lectures and books on, how to make your batteries last forever, how to charge them properly. We have published real manuals on building, what we call regenerative electric motors and low drag generators, so that you can build a self-running electromechanical machine. We have done all of these things, but we have not promoted any particular, political agenda. We haven't demonized anybody in the system. We haven't said that the physicists are rotten prostitutes or anything else like that. And we have published dozens and dozens of books and lectures on the real science of how to do these things with no hindrance whatsoever. And so I think at one of the conferences that we had recently, I think within the last 2 years or 3 years, John Bedini told me that he was approached by some retired generals who were at the conference afterwards, and they basically told him, he said, look, we know this technology is getting out. We can't stop it. We know that it's coming out, and at this point it's going to happen. We can't stop the phenomena anymore, and they have been actively stopping the phenomena for decades, or let's just say delaying it. But I think this is what's ratcheting the real story, on ratcheting up the war on terror, is really ratcheting up the other social control mechanisms, which are going to make it so that having a free energy machine isn't going to give you much advantage. In other words, if it doesn't matter if you've got a gun. They have not figured out how to get our guns away from us. But if you don't have any food and you don't have any water, it doesn't much matter whether you've got a gun. All you can do with it is go out and try and steal somebody else's food or water, and that just makes you the criminal, and then you have proved that you are dangerous to the rest of society, and then they'll go get you. Okay, so the thing is that this is a psych test for all of us,
how do you, the way I put it, Peter, is how do you fight evil without becoming evil?
That is the real trick. and it's going to require a very very stable and sane response. Take a look at what Gandhi did, to convince the British that they should leave India without becoming an enemy. And a lot of people had to be thrown in jail. A lot of people had to be murdered. A lot of people had to be beaten on. And but eventually the war was won because there are more of us than there are of them. And if we refuse to fight, but we also refuse to be penned in by all these artificial boundaries, they can't win. But we have to stay civil. It's incredibly important that we remain civil.
I agree with that. Now let me ask you one more thing here. Do you need to catch that?
Let me see what I think. Hold on. Yeah, it's just a telemarketer from India.
The U.S. Navy has done something that I've advocated, I've talked about many times, and that's that they have developed a technique to extract energy to propel their ships from the water they float on. Can you talk about that while I go heat up my coffee?
Well, there's a couple things that the Navy is doing, and a number of patents have issued, especially the nuclear aircraft carriers. They have absolutely determined how to take seawater and a few other handfuls of junk and generate all the fuel that it takes to fly all the jet aircraft off the deck. Okay, so they can basically manufacture fuel, what we generally refer to as fuel on demand, using the electricity generated from the nuclear reactor and the seawater and a few other little sprinkles here and there. And so that is something that has gotten a fair amount of publicity. You can look that kind of thing up on the internet and find the patents for these fuel on demand systems that the Navy has been saying that they were working towards developing, and in fact have gotten quite far in that. So in a time of war, an aircraft carrier is not dependent on a chain of supply when it comes to fuel for the aircraft, at least. I'm sure they'll still need food and things like that, but the other way of getting enough energy out of the ocean to run a ship, and this is something that I've published on a little bit and certainly is available, and that is that there's always a temperature differential between the ocean water and the air, and therefore energy can be extracted from that temperature differential to run some sort of material that would boil. That can be that temperature, that heat extracted can be concentrated until it's capable of creating a phase change in some sort of working fluid, and then that can be used to run an engine. And Nikola Tesla was really the first person to talk about this type of energy supply. He called it the self-acting engine, and actually explained his ideas on how to develop such a thing in an article that he published in the year 1900, which was 115 years ago. I have published on the actual method where that can be done, and in a lecture that I gave 2 years ago. And so the method is at this point not only known in private circles, but it's also in the public domain if anybody wants to learn about how this can be done. So, yeah, all of these things, the natural world is the source of all the energy we have. Whether you can extract it from the ambient heat or the ground or the wind or the sun or any of these things, they're all they basically all boil back down to effects of the sun hitting the planet periodically, so that one part of it heats up and another part of it cools down, and this constantly produces these temperature swings that can be used as energy sources to run machines.
I have also heard about driving a stake in the earth and using the earth as a battery. Could you, are you familiar with that technique? What are they doing? What's going on with that?
Well, the subject matter of what's called an earth battery is very, very old. It in many respects predates a lot of the work on chemical batteries, and it's been known for quite some time that if you just take two dissimilar metals like copper and iron, for instance, you just drive these stakes into the ground, there's a voltage gradient between those two things. And exactly why that's true, you'll find probably 4 or 5 different explanations of why it's true. But the fact is that it's true. And so the voltage gradient between iron and copper is about 1.5 volts. The gradient between say carbon and titanium is about 3.5 volts. So different materials. All you have to do is just throw them in the ground. Now, the big problem with an earth battery is that you can't series them up so easily like you can with an ordinary battery, to get the voltages higher. Like the battery in your car actually has 6 2-volt cells that come out to be about 12.5 volts. And that's easy to do because you can completely insulate those chemical cells from each other and then get the voltages to add. Now, when you start pounding metals, down into the ground, you can't insulate them from each other, and therefore you end up with the problem of that you've got a relatively low voltage arrangement. But if you take, if you want to make some voltage between, say, let's say copper, which we can get plenty of pretty easily, and iron, which you can get a lot of pretty easily. So let's say we take a 4-foot by 8-foot sheet of copper, and lay that down in a trench, and then put some dirt next to that, and then 6 or 8 inches away we lay in a big sheet of galvanized steel, and just cover it all up and bring up 2 terminals. We've got some pretty big surface area there, and even though we've only got 1.5 volts, we can get some power out of this thing, because so all we have to do then is take that and run that into a very simple circuit, which consists of a very, very low impedance, what's called just a coil of wire, that will allow, when the electricity flows between those 2 metals, it will produce a magnetic field. And then all we have to do is just have a little switch so to turn this thing on and off periodically, and every time it turns on, the magnetic field will form, and every time we turn it off, the magnetic field will collapse rapidly and jack the voltage up to maybe 15 or 20 volts, at which point it's useful to charge batteries or anything else we want to do. And all of a sudden we've got, we can pull as much electricity out of the ground as we want and turn it into something useful that we can power lights and everything else with later. So yes, you can make an earth battery, and you can make them practical by making them large, and it's a one-time cost. and the circuits to to make the energy coming out of them practical are very simple. One, a coil of wire and a switch just to turn on off, and you can make that a transistor if you want it to run a long time, or you can make it just a mechanical make and break, like an old Model T, self-actuated point system, that kind of thing. Any of those types of things will make it work. So yes, it works.
Now, Peter, have you heard of a man called Larry Woods? He's been on my show a number of times. He talks about his coils doing amazing things, and he paints a pretty interesting picture of these coils wound differently to provide more power. And he says there's people overseas that are interested in using him for over Unity devices. And I asked him about doing it here, and he says, I can't do it here. If I try to do it here, they will kill me. I just wondered if you'd heard of him.
Well, you and I talked about him last week when you had him on, and I am not familiar with his work, and I'm not familiar with the exact arrangements of the coils he's talking about. So I can't say anything about that.
Okay.
I can talk about what I do know, and I do know that there are certain arrangements of running electricity into coils and things that produce some of these effects, which can be engineered into energy producing phenomena. And I am in touch with some very advanced engineers and inventors in this field, and they are working with different arrangements of coils. Some of their coils are very standard, but then the core material in their coil is not standard. So I mean, and they can get non-standard effects out of these things. So there's quite a bit to learn about these things. I'm not in a position to say whether Larry Woods is blowing smoke or has a real technology. I do know that no one has been killed for just developing one of these things in their garage. The powers that be have much bigger fish to fry than looking around for anybody who's coming up with an invention and killing them immediately. That's complete nonsense. There are some things that make sense and some things that don't make sense. They definitely don't want any of us to know how to build a machine that produces 5 kilowatts of power continuously with no fuel. They don't really. They're very sure about that, because the national security protocols would be that there are terrorists out there that they don't want to to have this sort of power, fuelless portable power plant, and there are situations where there are certain things that they won't allow. What we've done is we've published on the science of how to do it, rather than try and develop a working model that we would bring to market. So some things are allowed and some things are not, and I'm quite sure that making plans and or real working units that would have the ability of taking you easily off the grid, for a single one-time cost of $1,000 or something, that's not going to be allowed right now.
By national security. That's what I was told at the Tesla convention in Albuquerque. The people that I talked to said, no, that's against national security. They will come after you if you try to do that.
I think that's true. There's a reasonable argument for it. If you're into that kind of thing. If you're into the us against them mentality, then the reason for that is this: is that let's say there's this group called Al-Shabaab, over in Somalia, and they're bad, and they hijack ships, and they do all these things, and they bomb malls and all this kind of thing. And obviously these are bad people, and we don't want them around here, and we don't want their people to have more influence in the world. And so if we published how to build one of these things, or made these things freely available, made in China and everything else, then they could, then that kind of group could basically take one of these things and stick it in a tube and put a little electric motor on it and put a little laptop on it and a GPS and a bucket of germs and throw in some radioactive medical waste and a bunch of junk and create a little little mini submarine that has an unlimited power supply on it, so they can just shove it off the beach, in Somalia, and have it wind its way around the oceans until it comes into New York Harbor and blows up. Okay, and the fact is that there isn't a country in the world that has a defense against something like this, and so the only way of preventing something like this from becoming real is simply to make sure that they don't have the power supply that would make this readily easy. And so that's not an unreasonable. I mean, I don't want a bunch of malcontents to be able to do that. I honestly don't. And right now, the cost of preventing them from being able to do it is that I can't do it right now either. And I understand that, and that means that only people who really want one of these things, they have to learn the science, and we've already published on what the science of this is, and they have to run their own experiments, and they have to develop these things, and when they build one, they can stick it in their own basement, keep their mouth shut, cover their roof with solar panels, whether they use them or not, and light their house. And as long as everybody thinks it's solar, nobody cares. They're not going to be shot, they're not going to be stopped, they're not going to be anything, but they have to shut up if they're using one of these types of devices. And that's the cost at the social level right now of how people are doing it. Okay? There's a lot more people out there who have these things than you might think, but the only people who get to keep them are the people who build it and shut up, not the people who build it and try and show every one of their neighbors how to have one too. And that's just where we are with it. Okay? What's happening to our society is that it's going to be pushed off a cliff. It's happening for artificial reasons, and the people who have these things in their basement, quietly running now, are going to be able to use them more, directly after the crash than before, and they'll be able to help more people build them after the crash than before. And
you think we're
we don't take a long.
You think we're headed for a crash, financial crash?
Well, I think the financial crash is inevitable. There's no system in the world has ever operated indefinitely on a fiat currency situation. What's different now? I mean, I know a lot of people who think that we should be back on the gold standard, but I mean, I sell electronic downloadable books on the internet, that teach people all the physics and the science on these advanced energy machines. And if we were on the gold standard, nobody could buy anything on the internet. So because there's no way of trading gold on the internet. Okay, in other words, if I couldn't exchange electrons of information for electrons that represented money on the internet, then I wouldn't have a business, and I couldn't have figured out I wouldn't have had the time to develop all these educational materials. And so, the thing is we have to use the resources that are at hand. And even though I don't believe that the money situation or the money system as it is currently configured is sustainable, still it's the one we've got right now. And, and so I've been using it. And that's all we've got, okay?
I just did a show.
Like you said, the humans survived, for the last 100,000 years. That's 2 ice ages, with nothing more than a fireplace and a bunch of fur. So I mean, we don't need free energy systems to survive. That's not the issue. The question is how much of a sense of civilization can we bring forward, if society comes unglued, and that's more. And I want to bring forward as much of it as possible. And and that's what takes more, energy. But going back to something you said at the beginning, you said that that civilization's based on the family farm, and I agree that the civilizing action of the family unit, growing up in a family and being forced to get along with these people because we call them family, is the beginning of learning how to get along with everybody. And I do believe that that's true. But until society organizes itself at a certain level, not much happens. And in other words, there's no roads. There's certainly no bridges. There's certainly no, significant large buildings. There's no memorials. There's no anything that costs more than a handful of people can come up with, and especially just bridges. There's no way to a society that's built completely on the family farm, with no other larger social structures, is ever going to, develop, into a large-scale civilization. And though it is a building block for that, it's not the end result of that. And we live in a very complicated world, and any of these attempts to oversimplify it, I think leads people to a misunderstanding of not only what we're up against with regard to the people who want to lower the population of the planet, but also what our role may be that will be effective, in countering these trends. I'm not too concerned about whether people get a free energy machine, but I am concerned about people's inability to cooperate. Because if the bulk of the population was willing to cooperate and really, volunteer to, subjugate their own personal whims for the genuine greater good of society, then the people who have been wanting us to be more and more and more individualistic, because it makes our group action less effective, wouldn't have gotten so far, and we wouldn't be in this mess in the first place.
Well, so, I agree with that. I have been trying to do this for years, over 20 years, trying to put the people together, trying to get them to cooperate with each other, trying to get them to communicate with each other. And I almost reached the conclusion that the elite were right when they said we weren't smart enough to be able to rule ourselves.
Well, the thing is that that's a self-fulfilling prophecy, because they're the ones keeping us stupid. So we never really had a chance. See, and that's where I'm constantly looking at how we're being subjected to a particular um, line of thought, which is actually just propaganda. Their position. As long as they get to define how society functions, then they're going to make it malfunction so that they can stay in control. And as long as we see that, and what our role is in that malfunction, if we can really get to the point where we understand how we are being manipulated into malfunctioning, then we can do something to function better. And this has been, this has been a very, very deep inquiry in my life of what does it take, to move my actions towards a higher level of civility, something that is genuinely willing to move towards the common good of all in a way that's responsible and requires of me to move quickly when I can, and but also to restrain myself when that is the better, when that benefits more people. And it takes a lot of insight. It takes a lot of patience. It takes a lot of heart, and a lot of genuine goodwill, to learn how to behave this way, since there are no television shows which suggest that this is a good way to behave. I mean, half the shows on TV right now are about vampires and idiot goofballs.
Yeah,
so,
turn on the TV. Let's watch a murderer or two. Let's watch somebody raping and killing. Oh, that's just
exactly.
a news story. That's just the news shows.
Yeah, right. That's the news, and that's the. But that's the general. That's what they're feeding everybody in the. In the movies and on TV and everything else. And the point is that obviously that's to distract us and to fill our subconscious with the idea that that is the model for human behavior, so that when conditions get difficult, then that's the first thing that people are programmed to do, is just to act in a very narrow self-interest way of just getting rid of all the competition so that I've got all the food that's left. And what they don't recognize is that there's always somebody with a bigger hammer or something else, and that if they think that that's going to help them survive, then they're only 5 minutes away from being the next piece of driftwood. And the only way to move this forward is to do it together, and to do it with care.
Kindness. I call it kindness. Just work together with just a little kindness. And you just took my one of my standard lines. They don't call television programming for nothing.
There it goes. So yes, exactly. Yeah, I mean, the only way through this, because we're going to go through this. You see, this is what other things people are trying to figure out how to not be at effect to the historic events of our time, and it's not possible. Everybody is subject to the historic events of their time. And when the plagues ravaged Europe, the people who lived alone, the loners, were the ones who didn't get the diseases, because everybody who was near anybody else who got the disease also got the disease. And when they tried to wrap up the dead body, they got the disease, and everybody was dying like mad. And eventually all the paupers, who lived off in the middle of nowhere, ended up with the mansions because everybody else died. And so the point is that if we're going to be the ones who live through this, we need to be kind. We need to survive. We need to cooperate. We need to know who our friends are, and we need to be able to be a friend that other people will value, because working in a group is going to have a better advantage than trying to do it yourself. Anybody who's as an individual up against a gigantic killing machine like what's about to mow us all down, or wants to mow us all down, the individual isn't going to stand a chance. Only people who are working in groups are going to have a chance, or a better chance. And that means that we have to know how to be a friend, know how to be a reliable member of a larger group, and and be that reliable member, but also require reliability from our associates, so that the group can function. Because if the group malfunctions, then it's not going to help us.
Well, that is kind of the theme behind my whole Liberty Village concept, because if we're living near each other, working together, then if it's good for me, it'll be good for you and your family. And if we've got a little bit of cooperation, because it's kind of like the barn raising for the Amish, We
Exactly.
I can't build anything worth a darn, but I can use a computer. I can use the radio. I can write books. But I need a little backup here to be able to do this. I mean, the same thing's true. I mean, I helped to set up Timothy Bible College and the Little Red Schoolhouse, so we could educate our children. You could educate your children at home and get your own education here without spending thousands and going into debt to go to some college somewhere else.
Right.
I think I've tried to come up with answers that work. And by the way, everything you said just a few minutes earlier, that's the reason I have you on my show. That's the reason you're invited on my show. That's the reason you've been on my show before, and that's the reason you'll be back on my show again.
Well, thank you.
It's a little bit of intelligence, a little bit of kindness, a little bit of work. It's work here. You have done incredible work investigating these technologies, investigating these systems, and passing them on. And
that's what we can do. See, we looked at what the boundaries were in relationship to the technology suppression, and because when I started looking into this in the early 1970s, basically there were stories that would pop up, this guy developed this, but then those people would never be funded, it was never turned into an article of commerce, and all sorts of things. The roadblocks were fairly obvious from the beginning, but we didn't really understand how it worked, and because in those days there was no internet or anything, and nobody would tell anybody anything. Everybody was patenting and protecting their intellectual property, and so it was impossible to find out anything about how these machines worked. And so it took a long time to figure out how some of these things work. I ran hundreds and hundreds of experiments myself, and started meeting other people in the field and moving forward like that. And when we got to the point where we knew how to build these types of machines, we said, okay, nobody else has ever gotten one of these things to market. Let's not assume that we will be able to either. So what can we do? What's the one thing that nobody's done yet? And that was publish. Literally just take what would normally be $1 trillion idea and just put the information in the public domain. And that's what we've been doing. And nobody stopped us.
I got to let you go. Peter, thank you very much for being on my show.
You're welcome.
God bless you. Thank you.
All right. Take care, Clay. Thank you so much.
Hello. 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 Speaking. Hold on just a second. Let me be right back. Okay, this is Clay Douglas. Go ahead. Yes, ma'am. Can you call me right back? All right, give me that number. I'll call you right back. 3718. Yes, ma'am. This is Clay Douglas. You called me? Well, I don't think so right at the moment. I am seeing a psychiatrist at the VA over here near me, and she's doing whatever she can to help me here. Not right here at the moment. Not today. I'm not. Kind of a friend. No, ma'am, not right now. Thank you. Okay, bye bye.